Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about top tips for Jewish family history research. Now, whether you have Jewish ancestry or not, there are some basic principles for researching immigrant ancestors that will apply to anyone. Those of you who don't have Jewish ancestry, I hope you'll stick with us. You might be surprised you may have Jewish ancestry. Let's talk a little bit about Jewish history here in the United States. There have been Jews in the United States since colonial times. As a matter of fact, until about 1830, the largest center of Jewish population in the United States was Charleston, South Carolina, which seems a little random to me. During the 1800s until about 1870, there was quite a bit of steady German Jewish immigration into the United States. Now, they didn't settle in pockets necessarily. They kind of spread out throughout towns and cities across the United States. In 1880, we see a big shift in Jewish immigration because of extreme persecution in Russia in particular, and then it kind of worked its way through Eastern Europe. We see a large number of very poor Ashkenazi Jews immigrating into the United States from about 1880 until 1924. In 1924, the laws changed about immigration, and so that immigration was slowed down or more controlled. But from that time, 1880 to 1924, we have 2 million Jews who come into the United States, and they settle in mainly the large eastern seaboard cities, Boston, New York, Philadelphia. There are some smaller pockets of some of those Jewish immigrants that ended up in Chicago, in New Orleans, in Galveston, Texas. And then over the course of that immigrant generation or the next generation, we see them start to work their way west out into San Francisco and Los Angeles. Now, at the time that the immigration laws were changed in 1924, there were approximately 3.5% of the United States population that self-identified as Jewish. Now, not quite 100 years later, we have less than 2% of the U.S. population that self-identifies as Jewish. What that means, and I've seen this happen, I attend the Jewish Genealogy Conference every year, and I meet people who are 2, 3, sometimes even 4 generations removed now from those immigrant ancestors who may have come in the late 1800s, and because of intermarriage, because of changes in interfaith marriages, because of changes in lifestyle, what we're seeing is some of these people do not even know that they have Jewish ancestry until they start digging into their family history. So like I said, even though you may not have Jewish ancestry, you may, and you may just not know it. And even if you don't have any Jewish ancestry, there are, again, some basic principles of immigration into the United States that I think you can learn from. We're going to cover that first and just talk about some basic principles of immigration research, and then we'll dive into some very specifics about Jewish family history research and getting started with that. So let's go ahead and dive in here. Let's talk about some of these basics about immigration research. You're always going to want to start with the census. That's just a basic genealogical principle almost. Start with the census. In particular, what you're going to be looking for is information about immigration. Immigration year, naturalization status. From 1900 to 1930, both of those things are listed on the census. Now, if your family came before then, pay special attention to the birthplaces of their children. If you have a family of 10 children and the first 3 children were born in the old country, and the 4th child was born here in the United States, you have a pretty narrow window there for the time of immigration. So always pay attention to those things. Here's where you're going to find that information on the census. If I'm looking at this 1900 census for this family in Chicago, I see here, zip it over here just a little bit. Here is, let's see, where'd my family go? Here we go. John Abramoff. He was born in Russia. His wife was born in Russia. They claim to have immigrated, at least according to this census, in 1891. And John is a naturalized citizen of the United States. So 1891 to 1900 is 9 years. So in that 9-year period of time, he became naturalized. Now, if you look at the birth of these children, you have a 13-year-old who was born in Russia, and you have an 8-year-old who was born in Illinois. That makes sense if they immigrated 9 years earlier. Now, there's a little bit of a gap here. 13-year-old to an 8-year-old, you've got 5 years. She is listed as the mother of 5 children, only 3 of whom were still living in 1900. So somewhere she has 2 children who died. It's possible there was a child in between this 13-year-old and this 8-year-old who died. And so, again, depending on where that child was born, you can corroborate this 1891 immigration year. However, don't just stop with one census record. I always, and I encourage this no matter what kind of research, genealogy research you're doing, always collect every record possible, because you never know who gave the information to the census taker. And sometimes you may find that it's a little bit off. And so collecting all of the information helps you to make sure that you're going to find the most accurate information. So here are John and Ida again. This lists their immigration year as 1893. So now we're talking 2 years later than what the 1900 census said. I would record that date as well, just as information, so that when I start looking for that immigration passenger list or that naturalization paperwork, I know what time frame or what window I'm working with. Again, he lists that he's a naturalized citizen. Now, the 1920 census is kind of crazy. I know it's the same family because the children's names are the same and the ages are all the same and they're living in the same city. However, their immigration year on the 1920 census is listed as 1911, which is so completely contradictory to the other records that I've found that I actually looked at this family several times to make sure it was really the same family, not just another family with the same names. And it lists that he has submitted papers, it says PA here, to become naturalized. So 1900, 1910 both list he's naturalized. 1920 says he's submitted papers to be naturalized. His wife is still listed as an alien citizen. So who knows who gave the census taker the information from the 1920 census? But here's the deal. If the 1920 census was the only record I found, and then off I went trying to find immigration information based on just this one census, I would have ended up probably very lost or very confused about what was happening with this family. I may have found a John Abramoff who immigrated in 1911 and thought that was my guy, and off I go, when in reality, I would be tracing the wrong family tree. So always collect as much information as you can about a family, particularly these census records. Now we're in the 1930 census, and if I scroll over here, we see that we're back to the 1890s. It lists 1896, so still kind of a few years different than some of the other records, but at least that makes more sense to me than 1911. And again, he's listed here as a naturalized citizen. So these census records, make sure you collect them all. Pay attention to immigration year and naturalization status. Record that information. I do that just in the notes of the person in my family tree maker file. There's also a notes feature on Ancestry.com if your tree is just online. So record that information so that when you start looking for those passenger lists in that naturalization paperwork, you know what you're working with. Also pay special attention to the birthplaces of those children. Make sure that they're reported consistently so that you can narrow down that window. Now, if your ancestor became naturalized, if they became a U.S. citizen, look for that paperwork next. Don't jump straight to trying to find them in a passenger list. There's a few reasons for that. We can talk about those in just a minute. Naturalization paperwork, make sure you've got the complete packet. A lot of times I'll talk to people and I'll say, well, what does the naturalization paperwork say? And what they're looking at is just a certificate of naturalization that's been passed down with the paperwork in the family. A packet, your naturalization packet, should include a declaration of intent, a petition for naturalization. Sometimes it will include a certificate that has to do with the name change. Sometimes it will also include a certificate of landing, which means somebody double-checked the passenger list to make sure that they were really listed on it. It should, at the minimum, contain that declaration of intent and that petition for naturalization. It will also often include the date, the port, and the ship of arrival. So they've done the research for you. Now, that's not always specifically accurate, but at least you'll know, people most likely are going to remember whether they came into the port of New York or the port of Boston. They may not remember the exact date correctly. They may not have the ship name exactly accurate, but at least the port will most likely be accurate. Also, that naturalization paperwork, because for much of the early 1900s, women and children were naturalized under the head of the household, it will include information about the spouse and the children. So you're going to find those on Ancestry.com as well. However, there's two different kinds of naturalization documents on Ancestry. One is just these index cards, meaning the government has gone through and they have indexed these naturalization paperwork, and they've provided information about the name, the date that the person was naturalized, a petition number, and what kind of a court it was. Okay, so for this particular collection, it's the Pennsylvania Circuit Court, and so that then leads you to the original paperwork. In some cases, we actually have the original petitions online. The documents themselves are here online. So here is a petition for naturalization for another Abramoff, and it lists his address, it lists his birth, place, date and place, the city in Russia where he was born. It lists the port he left from, in this case Hamburg, Germany, and the port he arrived into, which was New York. He doesn't remember the name of the ship. It lists his declaration of intent to become a U.S. citizen. In this case, he's filing in the U.S. District Court in Massachusetts. He lists his wife's name and birthplace, and then if they had children, they would be listed here. There's other information, so I would encourage you to read through the whole document. Also, it is a multiple page document. So down here at the bottom, you're going to want to click on the next image icon here. Just click to the next image to load that next image. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 or 4 pages. So you have to keep going image after image until you can see what else is there. So that naturalization paperwork is super important, and it helps focus your search. You know, when you find the naturalization paperwork, you know you have the right person because it often lists spouses and children. So it helps you make sure you're tracing the right person. As I mentioned, it sometimes will include information about name changes. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. And then it will list the date, ship, and port of arrival, which will then help you to find the actual passenger list. Now, when you're looking for passenger lists, there is additional information on these passenger lists than what you might be aware of, okay? Specifically, pay attention for birthplace and last residence. They're not always the same, so make sure you know which column you're looking at or what the column headings are for that particular passenger list. Pay attention to who they're traveling with. So if they're not just the people that have the same last name that are listed right next to them, but look down the page and see other people that may have been born in the same place or other people who may have the same last residence. Oftentimes what you'll see is communities of people or groups of people who worked or worshiped together who would migrate together. And so pay attention to other people on that passenger list, not just that page. Go forward a few pages, go backward a few pages. Pay attention to other people born or residing in the same place as your ancestor. Also, on later passenger lists, there's a period of time where there were 2 pieces of super helpful information recorded. One is who they are going to join in the United States. So they had to have some kind of a sponsor. So who is it that already lives here that they are coming to be with? And then who is it that they left behind? Who is the person, what's the name and address and relationship of the person in the town they just left? Particularly for this, for immigrant research, you always want to be on the lookout for more specific information than just Russia or Germany. Oftentimes when you're looking at a census, that's all it records. They were born in Russia, they were born in Germany, they were born in Austria. But because of shifting boundaries in particular, and because of shifting political opinion, that information is not going to help you to locate records in the old country. You need a town name or a county or a region, because records most often are going to be held in Europe at that level. So if you want to do any more research into that family, you're going to need to know more specifically where they are from. So counties and towns are the things you're looking for. So let's just take a quick look here at a passenger list. I found a pretty typed one so that we can maybe look at it a little bit more clearly. Let me enlarge it just a little bit and drag it over here. So here is an Abramoff family. I probably should have picked one that had an easier name to pronounce. And you can see here, because there are several people with the same name, and several of them are stamped as being under 16 years of age, that this is very likely a mother and her children. Okay, there's information here about this family. In particular, she says she's joining her husband, and she writes and speaks a little English. Now, she considers herself a British citizen. Her last residence, that's what this column is for, was actually Leeds, England, but she is Hebrew. A lot of times you'll find Jewish people listed as Jewish, Hebrew. Look for clues like the fact that their language spoken was Yiddish. Those are some of the clues you're looking for. Now, this last column on this page, or this large column on this page, is the name and complete address of the nearest relative or friend in the country where they just came from. Now, they just came from England, so she lists that her daughter, Mrs. Harris, is living at this address in Leeds. So now we know that she has another daughter that she actually left behind in England, and that is a married woman. So another clue to help to put the family together. Her final destination is listed here as Burlington, Vermont. Might not strike you as a large settlement for Jewish people, but that's where she's headed. Now, here's one of the tragedies of family history research. Sometimes people don't realize that there is more information. Always, when you are looking at a passenger list, check the next page. Sometimes these were 2-page ledgers that when opened up, they just wrote all the way, or typed in this case, all the way across both pages to denote information about a single person. So here, where this family is on, lines 1 through 6, it's a little easier, but always pay attention to the line number that your family is listed on, so that when you click to the next image, you know who this information pertains to. So in this case, we have more information. Information like who paid their passage, how much money they have on them, have they ever been to the United States before, and here is a fantastic piece of information: whether going to join a relative or friend, and if so, that person's name and complete address. So she lists that they are coming to her husband, the children's father. Here's his name and address in Burlington, Vermont. So again, you're putting together information about families. That becomes really important information. One of the things that is very prevalent with Jewish immigration and Italian immigration, probably more so than any other ethnicities, is that the families often immigrated in waves. So what you'll see very often is that the husband or father would come first, followed by some of the older teenage children, and then the mother would come usually last with the younger children. That doesn't always hold true, but that is the typical pattern. And so this helps you keep track of each member of the family. Now, over here we have information about their health and their height and their weight and what they look like, any identifying marks, and then this very last column over here is actually the place of birth. Now remember, they came from Leeds, England, and if you note, all of the children here were born in Leeds, England, but the mother was born in Simri, Russia. And so here we have the one piece of information in the very last column on the second page of the passenger list that's going to get you to the location in Eastern Europe where this family originated. Again, this is a fairly common Jewish migration story. Oftentimes, a couple would get married, And the family would pool together, both families would pool together the money necessary to get them out of Russia as a wedding present. And sometimes they could only get as far as a port city in Germany or as far as England. That was as far as they could get with the money that they had. And then they would work for a few years. In this case, this oldest child is 14, so we know they were in England for at least 14 years. And before they could save up the money in order to migrate to the United States or to Canada or to Australia. So this one piece of information here then provides us with the origin of the parents, or at least in this case, the mother in Russia. So pay close attention to those passenger lists. Again, what you're always looking for is a county or a town name in the old country that's going to help you get closer to records that might still exist. Now, just a few quick reminders. You want to think broader than just the immigrant. You want to pay attention to information, in this case, about the spouse. That helped find that location. Pay attention to the children and even the grandchildren that are born here in the United States. Very often you'll find, I have come across where a grandchild's obituary will list in like kind of biographical form, her grandparents were from this particular region of Russia or Germany or Poland. And so even though they're second and sometimes third generation in the United States, you'll find biographical information with some of these children and grandchildren that will list the region that the family came from originally. A lot of those first and second generation family members had a lot of connection to that place. Now, some of them wanted no connection with it. They didn't want to talk about the old country. They didn't want to think about the old country. They didn't want to ever mention it again. And so sometimes that's when you have to pay attention to some of these other collateral relationships. Do they have siblings or nieces and nephews who immigrate 10, 12, 20 years later than them that you can find that it'll list where they came from? Do they have like those, like I talked about, are there other people on the passenger list, friends, neighbors, and associates who may have migrated from the same location? Pay attention to people who are witnesses and sponsors and engaged in land transactions with them. All of that will help you find people that they associated with, that they may have associated with in the old country. There are other records available. Death records in particular for Jewish immigrants. Pay attention to those tombstones. Oftentimes what you're going to find on the tombstone is not just their Russian name or their American name, but you'll find their Hebrew name. And sometimes even the birthplace lists or chiseled in the stone in Hebrew. And so, find someone, if you're doing Jewish family history research and you don't read Hebrew, find someone who can. Oftentimes a local synagogue, there are online Facebook groups and helps that can help you to do that. But those tombstones, particularly for Jewish research, become a really, really rich resource of information. You just have to be able to read the Hebrew or get it translated. Now, let's spend our last couple of minutes here just talking about specifically the Jewish collection on Ancestry.com. We have a landing page specifically for Jewish family history research. You get to it by going to Ancestry.com/Jewish. I'm going to show it to you here in just a minute, but just want to make sure you have that URL. Simple, Ancestry.com/Jewish. It will take you to a landing page that looks like this. It is a way for you to search Jewish-specific record collections on Ancestry.com. So Ancestry.com has a lot of partners that we have worked with to put records online. Jewish Gen is probably the largest collection of records we have available online. And because Jewish Gen is a free service, a lot of the work done on the records available from them has been done by volunteers. All of the databases we have from Jewish Gen online are free. You do not have to have a subscription to Ancestry.com. Or if they are Eastern European records and you only have a US subscription, you can still access them without upgrading to a world subscription. So that's the Jewish Gen records. We also have records from some of the local United States Jewish organizations that maintain records. The American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, the American Jewish Historical Society, the Miriam Weiner Routes to Roots Foundation, and most notably the United States Holocaust Memorial and Museum. Of course, the Holocaust records are available for free as well. Those are being indexed by our World Archives Project contributors. Some of these other records do require a subscription, but Jewish Gen records and the Holocaust Museum records are available for free. So what this search box does is it allows you to search any of those Jewish specific collections. It also gives priority to any record where a person is identified as Jewish. So I mentioned earlier, sometimes people are listed on a passenger list as Hebrew, or sometimes they're listed on a census as speaking Yiddish. Anytime a record has that kind of a notation, and we can tell, or our computers can tell, that it's about a Jewish person, that will rank higher or show up higher in your search results if you use this search. One final thing about the difference of this search from the other search, from the general or global search on Ancestry.com, Jewish surnames have there's actually some gentlemen who have created a Soundex, or a sounds-like search algorithm for Jewish surnames because of the way that the letters sound or are written in in some of those Eastern European languages. It's called the Mokotov Soundex, and so if you use the search on this landing page, or if you use the Jewish collection priority on the global search, it uses the Mokotov Soundex on surnames rather than just the standard US Soundex. So that's the difference about this search box. Last two things I want to show you on this page, and this actually has to do with some of the challenges of Jewish family history research. First one is this: people had multiple names, multiple name variants, and sometimes they even changed their names. So for given names, what you're most likely going to see are that people had a Russian name, they had a Yiddish name, they may have had a Hebrew name, and then when they came to the United States, sometimes they Americanized their name. So Shmuel became Samuel, Moishe became Morris, Rochel became Rachel, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of a difference of pronunciation. Sometimes it's a matter of completely spelling it differently. Sometimes it's a matter of completely changing the name. Last names, we run into the same thing, right? That Abramoff family, some of the descendants in that family shortened their name to Abrams. Some of them changed it to Abraham. And some of them still maintain the Abramoff name. So third generation, these are second cousins. We have 3 different surnames in that one generation, even though they all descend from the same family. So there is a tool we've provided on the Jewish Family History landing page that will help you if you're not familiar with some of these name variants. So it's called the Jewish Name Variations, and you just type in a name. So in this case, I've typed in the name Rachel. You select a country. Rachel is the name she was known by in the United States, and click search. Now, I've done the research, and I know that the Rachel I'm looking for was from Belarus originally, or what is now Belarus. She was from Russia. Everything said Russia, but where she's from is now in Belarus. And so here then are a list of possible variations, names that she would have been known by in Belarus, names that she would have been known by in Yiddish, okay? And then this is what we call local secular names. And you can see some of them overlap, some of them are the same, some of them are just, again, it's a difference in pronunciation, so it's really the same name, but we are just spelling it slightly different. But this is just to give you an idea, or to start those juices flowing as you start looking for people, as you find someone on a passenger list who looks like, the names are all sort of right, and the ages are all accurate, and the people are all together in a family the way you expect them to be, but she has this different first name. Well, this will help you just kind of make sure you're on the right track. The second tool available on that landing page has to do with place names. So not only are people's names sometimes a little unfamiliar or changing, but those place names sometimes are unfamiliar to us, can be misspelled a variety of ways. Sometimes those places no longer exist. Sometimes those place names have changed over time. They have had a Russian name. They've had, maybe your ancestor pronounced it a certain way or wrote it a certain way. And so on that landing page again, go back here, we have what's called a Jewish community locator And this works actually if you're looking for anywhere in Eastern Europe, even if it's not a Jewish specific community. It's kind of a fun tool. So I'm going to put in Mogilev because that's the location that I have on the records here in the United States. And when I click search, it's going to give me two possibilities, one in Belarus now and one in Ukraine now. And so I need to look at both of those, look at the information I have and see if I can figure out which one it is. Once I determine, and that's important because a lot of places in Eastern Europe, you'll end up with towns, sometimes even these small villages where you'll have 3 or 4 of them. So the more information you can collect in the US records, the more likely you are to identify the correct location. So then it takes me to a map that shows me where that location is. In this case, it's in Belarus. The even cooler fact that I love about this is that it shows me nearby Jewish communities and how far those communities are. People often married people from nearby Jewish communities. And so if you know that your great-grandmother was from Mogilev, then maybe you can finally understand where your great-grandfather was, what that chicken scratch was on his passenger list that you couldn't quite read, but it looks maybe like this. Now you have a possible location. Just below that, you'll find some other names by which this location has been known. So in Belarusian, it's spelled this way. In Russian, it was this. In German, it was this. Polish, Ukrainian, Yiddish, Lithuanian, right? Because every those boundaries shifted over time. And the name of the place didn't change, just the pronunciation may have changed or the spelling may have changed depending on who was saying or spelling it. So that gives you all the different spelling variations or other names that location was known by. Also, it tells you the borders. In this case, it was part of the Russian Empire before 1900. It is now part of Belarus. It tells you what region it is, and that's important, what province, because typically records are held at a provincial level in most of these Eastern European countries. It's kind of like what we would think of here in the United States as a county. So I would want to go to this province in order to locate records for my family. Whew, a lot of information today, but important information. And like I said, that was just top tips for beginning Jewish family history research or really any kind of immigrant research, just to get you started. Once you get started, there are a lot of resources available to you to help help you advance your knowledge and your research. Lots of resources available to help you dig further into some of those records in Eastern Europe. And hopefully you'll take advantage of some of those resources available online and some of the offline resources, some of those conferences. I mentioned there is an International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies conference every summer, usually in July or August. In 2014, it will be held here in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is fantastic because it's right by the Family History Library, which has a huge collection of offline resources as well. So if you're interested in learning more about family history, I would encourage you, Jewish family history, I would encourage you to look into that conference. The acronym for that, IAJGS 2014. If you Google that, you should find the information about that particular conference. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.